Yeah, we see a turf war coming up. Really, there is. I think it's about individual situations. I mean, Mr. Bennett mentioned about not permitting grey water systems in Las Vegas. Well, we've seen that in other areas where there have been sewage catchments quarantined from reuse because it's already been allocated for certain uses, and so it requires the water authorities and the states to get involved and put in access regimes. And it's been done in Sydney, where it's basically on a first come first serve basis, because anybody who's going to invest in some kind of water infrastructure needs to know if they're taking it from the sewer that it's going to be there, and that somebody's not going to come upstream and take all the water from it when you've invested capital downstream. And so there does have to be a framework for it. Where we see bigger opportunities, I think, is in areas where there is not already sewage infrastructure, and this is not just about drought, it's about population pressure, and the similarities between what we see in Australia and what's happening in the US and what's happening everywhere else, in many places in the world, are just really striking. And we've got similar population projections and the pressure on water supply, and what we're seeing is that the existing cities have sewage infrastructure. The new development wants to go outside that infrastructure. The easier areas to be developed have all been done, and so it's about going out there where there is no infrastructure. And so putting in recycled water on a decentralised basis rather than connecting to the centralised system allows for that opportunity to happen, and it also makes a whole lot more sense because you're not pumping the water vast distances. As Bill mentioned earlier, there's still quite a lot of embedded energy in reclaimed water, and by that I think, Bill, you meant the water that is taken from the dam, pumped into the city, goes out to the sewage treatment plant, and then piped back to the golf course or to the building. That definition of reclaimed water, there's quite a lot of energy associated with it. The energy associated with decentralised schemes, or schemes where it's on site, as Paul mentioned, is quite low, and a lot of that's because you're not pumping at vast distances. And so there's no silver bullet to this, but there are a lot of opportunities for it as well.
Go ahead, Paul.
I think that it's a bigger issue than sewage. It's about the fact that Americans use 50 to 60% of their water on the lawns and garden. So if we can, in an ideal world, we could actually reduce that consumption by at least 30 to 40% simply by stopping using sprinklers. That's a bigger impact than saying it's my sewage or someone else's sewage. But then we have other issues that if we reduce surface irrigation by that percentage, does that mean, and a large percentage of that, 30 to 40% of that irrigation is actually going down into the aquifers. So, in general. So if that's the situation and we stop people sending water down to the aquifers, and we're then cutting water out of the actual collection system. So is it a case that there's only so far that a certain drop of water can go? And how do we support 400, 500 million Americans in 30 to 40 years?
Yeah, there's been some discussion of the living building concept, where you fill a building up when it's first built, and that's it. Everything else is reclaimed water, gray water, air conditioning, condensate, on-site black water treatment, and all the water used in that building is generated internally. Is that practical, and is it a good idea, whether commercially or residentially? That's anybody who wants to take this one. Go ahead, Paul.
I think it is, because realistically, we want to maximise the use of every drop of water we've got. So if we can capture the rainwater at that building, use it 2 or 3 times, might have gone through the drinking water process first, then it could have been treated, put back into the laundry, perhaps showers, or who knows. It can then be used a 3rd time, goes into the garden, and then goes into the aquifer and can be picked up by the water purveyors and reissued back out for its repeated uses. I think it's going to have to head that way. We need to get 10 uses of each drop, not just 2. That's my perspective.
Collin?
Yeah, I think it's certainly a goal that we should be striving towards. It comes down to the water balance on each individual site. Some commercial buildings are actually net users of water, even if you recycle all of the water on that site. I mean, an example of a building we're doing right now, 20,000 gallons a day is the Blackwater recycling plant. Only a quarter of that is going to toilet flushing. There is no showering, or very little showering in that building, very little in the hand basins, and so you have to take all of the black water from the toilets, put it back to the toilets, but then what about the 3/4 that is used for the cooling tower? Well, in that case, we're extracting from the main sewer. Another example would be if it's a residential complex, and we often have the situation where there is too much water because you have to allow for the fact that during wet weather or winter months you're not wanting to and often can't irrigate very much. You don't necessarily have the land to take it all, and so you have to look at what you're going to do with that water during those months, especially when, as I say, residential, you've got the extra water load from showering. And so we're doing developments at the moment where they are totally self-sufficient in water, and what is necessary is the right master planning of that development. And it always involves reuse back into the buildings. It involves irrigation, and it often involves some kind of community landscaping or water-sensitive urban design of the development, which means perhaps a golf course, some neighbouring parks. It requires a little creativity in what might be nearby as to where you're going to use that water.
Peter, what do you think?
From personal experience, I believe that it's technically feasible, but today it's not economically feasible. But certainly I agree with my colleagues. It's a goal worth striving towards. I believe that there are some industrial buildings in Japan that are doing this, or maybe they're apartment complexes, but they are actually recovering the black water as well as all the gray water. And I know there's a tiny manufacturer in Minnesota that is, his house has been turned into a demonstration project. He is using zero water from the municipality. His makeup water comes from rainwater, and all of his gray water in the house is treated with membrane technologies and ozonation and is turned into drinking water. And his black water is sent into the basement, and he uses it for vermiculture, growing worms. Not quite sure what he's doing with the worms, but at any rate, there's no water leaving his facility. The downside of it is he's trying to sell this concept, and it's about $50,000 per residence. So it's not real economically feasible, but certainly technically it is.
That's what I was going to say. There's a point of diminishing returns, and that incremental cost it takes to get gray water to drinking water quality or black water to reuse quality is pretty high. And so it's kind of like, it's analogous in my mind to trying to go completely off the grid. You can do it, it's possible, it's just very expensive, it's not really practical, and there's a lot of low-hanging fruit in rainwater capture and reuse, for gray water reuse, that's relatively inexpensive and accessible, that we ought to concentrate on first before we try to get completely off that water grid.
Maybe we could get a 30% uncapped tax credit for gray water systems. We have time for questions from the audience. Here comes the microphone.
Bob Pearson with Elmco Daddy. This question goes to our friends from Australia. How have you approached, or have any of your municipalities looked at the factor of charging you for rainwater? And the reason I bring that up is locally here, we obviously have some issues with our own Department of Water and Power, where they are looking at possibly putting meters on any stored water. And the state of Colorado, I believe, is also basically says we own the rain. So have you had any issues like this, and how have you addressed them?